Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin J. N. Hughes. Um, I'm a little bit under the weather today, but I still wanted to make a video for you guys. Um, because I love doing this. I love making content for you. If you love what I'm producing, then please consider following the link in the description below and supporting the work that we do, or following the link to our sponsor, BibleMemory.com, or using the Bible Memory app and using promo code FreedIndeed. It gets you 30% off and it helps support the work we're doing. So if you guys see this, please, if you guys see that, please do go ahead and do that. Instead of doom scrolling, spending your time on your phone, just flipping through things, you use that time that you're already spending on your phone to learn the Word of God. So it's a great app, it's a great service, and I highly recommend it. That said, let's get into our topic today. Today, I want to answer an email that I received, in which basically the crux of the email was that unlike non-liturgical traditions, Orthodoxy cannot survive into the era of space travel, and that we need to throw off the restraints of the liturgical calendar because we're now in the era of space travel, and every planet has a different um, planetary rotation around the sun, which means every planet would have a different calendar, which means that the liturgy doesn't work. Okay, so here is. So first off, I just want to say I really enjoy when I get emails like this because oftentimes um, people send you the same four or five objections. Um, Most people struggle with, like, if you're coming from a Protestant background, you probably struggle with the idea of sola fide or whatever. If you're coming from a Catholic background, you probably struggle with the idea of the papacy or whatever. If you're coming from whatever Western background, you probably struggle with the legal atonement theory. If you're coming from, a Nestorian background, you probably struggle with the Theotokos. If you're coming from, etc. So when you're doing apologetics ministry or even biblical counseling ministry, you tend to see a lot of the same questions over and over again. But questions like this only come around once in a great while. So I enjoy that. So if you have questions that you feel like are really unique, this feel free to send in your questions to the show, to me, and post them in the comments, whatever, so that so that I can make videos like this. Um, so the crux of the argument is that, for example, in this fellow's email, he mentions that the International Space Station rotates around the Earth once every 22 minutes. Um, and so, according to him, this means that it would be impossible to have morning and evening prayer because you experience sunrise and sunset every 22 minutes. So, how could you have morning and evening prayer? Okay. Um, this argument is flawed for a number of reasons. And I mean the whole argument, not just the space station part, but the whole argument is flawed for a number of reasons. First off, if this argument held water, then we should expect that people who, for example, have to work night shift wouldn't be able to have morning and evening prayers because their circadian rhythm is flipped. Um, but that's not true. Obviously, there's two ways that you can do this with night shift. You could either have your morning prayers when you get off work instead of before work. Um, And so you're still starting the objective day with prayer and then have your evening prayers before you go into work. So you're still ending the objective day, even though you're waking up and having your evening prayers. Or you can flip the script and have your morning prayers when you wake up in the evening, since those prayers are about waking up and these things. And then have your evening prayers when you come home from work and are going to bed. Even though it's objectively the morning, you can still participate in the reality of evening at that time. Either of those are perfectly legitimate for that person. And I think that that provides a basic framework. I think that provides a basic framework for um, how we respond to this issue. So essentially, you have to remember that whether or not human beings choose to colonize space, whether or not human beings choose to live in space, that isn't the environment we were created for. We were created by God for Earth's atmosphere, for Earth's calendar. And God, and the book of Genesis tells us that God created the stars of the heaven to be signs and seasons for us. So God created the stars so that we could use them to create the calendar and to have the liturgy for worshiping God. So, with that in mind, God created the stars in such a way so that they would be seen from Earth to give us this calendar. Um, so now, if we went and colonized some other planet somehow, which by the way is not overly likely, I actually have a couple of science fiction books. One of them is sci-fi horror, and one of them is I'm hoping it'll become a series. Um, and it's a sci-fi kind of epic space opera type thing. But in both of these, I had to deal, in order to make these novels realistic. By the way, they're not published yet. I'm still in the process of writing and publishing them. But in order to make both of these novels realistic, I had to deal with the simple fact that space is massive, truly massive, and kind of it's so massive that it's difficult for us to comprehend how large it is. So, if you traveled at the speed of light, it would take you 8 minutes to get from Earth to our own sun, let alone to the very edge of our solar system, let alone anywhere further than that. So this is why I've often joked that if Star Trek were real and they really did have engines that were traveling at, 5 times the speed of light or whatever, you're still getting nowhere fast. You're just traveling at. Now there is a possible way around this, but it carries its own really big problem because basically what would happen is you enter into a warp bubble, and then it takes you 5 years to get from one end of the galaxy to the other, and 5 years to come back. The problem is that you have only aged 10 years, but everyone back on Earth has experienced 1,000 years. So anyone you wanted to come home to is long gone. Um, and this is a huge problem for the idea of space travel. And I don't know if that theory is correct or not because we've never built warp engines. But the point is that that's one theory of how this could work. Otherwise, you're just traveling nowhere fast. Another theory is the idea of cryosleep. So, like on the movie Alien or Passengers, where they enter into a state of cryosleep and then they're taken to a distant galaxy, but their bodies are in a state of suspended animation. They are not. Um, they aren't experiencing time during that time. So they get to the other side of the galaxy. They haven't aged at all. Thousands of years may have gone by on Earth, thousands of years may have gone by on the ship, but the people haven't aged at all, and then they can start the colonization process once they get to this planet. However long it's taken for this to happen. So that's a possibility. Um, but again, it's not like you're going to go there and come back, if that's the case. So there's another possibility. Okay, wormholes. Somehow being able to enter into the wormhole in one place in space-time, like Stargate, and then you emerge from the wormhole in a completely different place in space-time. And this is the only way I can fathom that we could have deep space travel that wherein something wherein you could have a story really worth telling that like on an epic scale as far as a sci-fi epic. Some of those other things could work for like sci-fi horror, like you know, waking up from cryo sleep too soon, kind of like Passengers, that could easily be turned into a horror concept. Um, but as far as like epic narrative, it's pretty hard to write an epic narrative that is going to be any good and that shows us different planets within the story's universe. Um, if you're having to have people be in cryosleep for thousands of years in between visits to these planets. So wormholes, and whatever science there is behind that, that's where that comes in. Now, anyway, I've gone far afield from our thing, but my point is that, this is kind of an irrelevant argument anyway, because the truth is, as much as people want to believe that we're going to colonize all these other planets, it's just unlikely that human beings are ever able to do this unless we can develop some kind of wormhole technology, or something like that. So when uh, when we start building stargates, I'll believe that we can colonize other planets. Until then, I find it difficult to believe. Um, Now, as far as and then you have to factor in the idea of terraforming other planets because it's not like human beings can just breathe any kind of atmosphere. We need very specific, and this is where the idea of the rare earth comes in, that the fine tuning of the universe that we've talked about in our apologetics content before is such that there's really a very narrow subset of parameters in which human life can exist, and that just isn't out in space. It's here. Which this, by the way, is why I personally consider myself a Christian environmentalist. I do not believe in the quote unquote dig it up and burn it mentality. My mentality is very much that we should be preserving the earth as God has created it, because it's highly unlikely that we'll be able to find some other place to live. And if even if we did, we'd have to terraform it. All kinds of problems come into place with that one because how long is it going to take to terraform a planet? What would be required to terraform a planet? How are we going to establish these things? So even if, though, okay, let's assume for the sake of argument that we are somehow able to overcome all of these obstacles and we are in fact colonizing space, or let's assume that this objection is strictly speaking touching on things like the International Space Station and its peculiar cycle of sunsets and sunrises. Fine. Here's the thing. Human beings were created to experience a 24-hour cycle. That's part of, like I was just talking about, this narrow set of parameters. If we were to go to another planet and colonize it, we would have to find a way to replicate as near as possible the things that we have on Earth. We would have to recreate Earth's environment on that planet. That includes we would have to replicate Earth's calendar. We would still be living our lives as far as the calendar is concerned on Earth time. We would still use 24-hour cycles. It's the only way that human beings can truly um, live. It's the only way that we can really um, exist. We can't exist in a way that our daily cycle is 22 minutes long. It doesn't make any sense. Um, we can, however, choose to live a 24-hour cycle. And so it's 3 o'clock in the morning in in this region on Earth. That's the region I'm from. That's my work shift. Uh, my work shift starts at this time and ends at this time, even if it has to be, even if you have to pick a location on Earth and base your time off of that, which, by the way, if you do that, I think you should pick Jerusalem, as the sort of center of the Earth, or the middle of the Earth that you expand out from. And why? Why Jerusalem? That's the place Jesus lived. That's the place Jesus taught. That's the place Jesus died and was resurrected, is Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is the center of the world. If you look at medieval maps show Jerusalem symbolically as the center of the world. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And by center of the world, I don't mean scientifically. Like, obviously, we know the Earth is a sphere, and that sphere has a core. I'm not saying Jerusalem is at the core of the Earth, but Jerusalem is the center of the Earth's geography. Jerusalem is where we define what is north. Who are the North men? Who are the men of the North? That's defined by their relative location to Jerusalem. What is the global South? Defined by its relationship to Jerusalem. What is the East? Defined by its relationship to Jerusalem. What is the West? Defined by its relationship to Jerusalem. Again, if you look at medieval maps, this is why people referred to certain nations as Western nations because they were west of Jerusalem, whereas other nations were Eastern because they were east of Jerusalem. Jerusalem being the central location of of geography, of sacred geography. Okay. So if you're going to just pick a place, I think you should pick Jerusalem. I don't know if that's what would be picked. I'm sure that probably, the ISS is mostly made up of American and Russian scientists. So they'd probably pick like either Washington, D.C. or Moscow. But I would like to think that maybe somebody would float the idea of Jerusalem as the place. I don't know. Doesn't matter because that's not really the point. The point is that you would have to live as though you're on a 24-hour cycle in order to have any meaningful calendar, any meaningful sense of the calendar. Because we are not designed to live on Mars's calendar. We are not designed to live on Jupiter's calendar. We're not designed to live on the calendar of some celestial object that is orbiting around Canis Majoris. We are designed specifically to live on Earth, and that includes Earth's cycle of rotation around the sun. Which means if we did colonize some other place, we would have to, liturgically speaking, live as though we are still on Earth's calendar. Our physical bodies are still going to age in Earth years. Um, where you're not going to live, let's say that you travel to a planet that takes 300 Earth years to revolve around the sun. um, Nobody's going to say he died before his first birthday, when you're 76 years old. Nobody's going to say, um, that, and nobody's going to say that we would live 74 cycles around that planet on average just because we're living on that planet. No, we would still live the same life cycle we have here, including, on average, about 74 to 76 Earth years. And so we have to maintain that calendar, which means liturgically, we would just keep doing the same thing. We would just keep praying morning and evening prayers when it was morning and evening as designated by that planet's whatever, geography. However, we are figuring out what Earth time it's going to be, that's something I don't get paid enough to try to work out, frankly. But what I will say is we would have to do something like that. We would have to figure out doing it based on Earth's life cycle. Because we would still be creatures who live that life cycle. We wouldn't be creatures who live Mars's life cycle because we're not from Mars. We would still age in Earth years. Okay, so I think that that answers the objection just fine. Basically, the truth is that whether we live on Earth or colonize space or whatever, we still live as though we are on Earth. And so, for the same reason why the International Space Station has to use oxygen and can't just be part of the void, we also have to have the same calendar. And by the way, on the International Space Station, um, some of the Russian astronauts up there, or I think actually I recently saw a thing that all of the astronauts currently serving on the ISS are Orthodox Christians who have a prayer corner complete with icons set up on the ISS and who pray every day, praying their morning and evening prayers. So they have not found this objection to be insurmountable to their Orthodox faith, and they're the ones who are actually doing this. So hopefully that deals with this objection, and God bless. And yeah, share this with your friends so they too can be freed indeed.